it on YouTube. So there we go. Okay. I'll go ahead and share my whole screen. Minimize a bunch of things here. All right, cool. So today we are going to kind of do a finish up follow-up from the ethics section, and we're going to start with this activity. This is one of my experiments to see if we can do activities without me passing them out. So essentially, if you're here today, you'll get the points rather than turning them in. Again, just to try to minimize passing things and minimize germs and all those good things. Thank you again for being flexible on Wednesday. In case you didn't see my email, I am negative, so y'all are safe. Although one of my other colleagues did get the same notification. So the only place we were together was at faculty pre-session. So somebody there had it and it's positive. Woohoo! But I'm negative, thank goodness. The double masking helps, the being cautious helps. So I'm gonna take attendance real quick so you can get credit for this, and then I will have you kind of just clump with the people around you. I'm not really gonna like divide you into formal groups and talk through this case and what ethical violations you might see. So, Ashanti? All right, Erin, Debbie, Sydney, Troy? Oh, that's right, Troy is visiting family. Leah, not here today. Autumn, Elijah, the other Aaron, all right. Terrence, Jalen, Anissa, Stephen, Arian, and Haley, and Brittany. I did. Did I say it right?
No, it's Terry on. It's okay.
Terry on. Oh, I'm gonna write it down. Nope, I want to get it right. So thank you for correcting me. People, so my first name is pronounced Karen, and people pronounced it Karen for a while when I was growing up, like right when I moved to a new town. And I was so shy, I didn't correct. So now I'm always like very conscientious about if I'm saying it wrong, I want to correct myself. Alrighty, so let me try to get this a little more viewable. There we go, readable, legible. So I will actually just read it out loud, and if you have your book, you can reference the ethics code there. You should also be able to just Google APA ethics code pretty easily and pull it up with your phone. So the case, Dr. Colby administered a battery of psychological tests to Martin, a 9-year-old boy. Martin was referred for testing by his elementary school because he was showing significant academic and behavioral problems. After examining Martin, Dr. Colby stated in his written report, Martin's test result indicated high levels of psychesthesia, suggesting he is fixated at the phallic stage. It is very possible he will experience a psychotic breakdown in the near future. Dr. Colby also wrote, Martin's full-scale IQ score on the WAIS-3 was below the 2nd percentile, indicating mental deficiency. After Dr. Colby gave Martin's parents a verbal summary of his findings, they were very upset. They asked Dr. Colby for copies of Martin's test scores in the written report. Dr. Colby refused, stating that giving unauthorized individuals these materials would compromise the validity of the tests. Upon leaving the office, Martin said to his parents, that was a test to see if I could go to soccer camp this summer, right? The doctor never said why he gave me this test, but that's why. I can't wait for camp. So again, go ahead and group up with people around you. And I was looking for like 3 ethics code violations. There might be more. So try to figure out which ones were violated. And then the last question is, do you think he should be able to keep assessing people? Why or why not? So I'll give you about 5 to 10 minutes to chat with people about this. I'll leave the actual case up. And again, if you have your book on you, in the back, they have the ethics codes. Or like I said, you can just Google APA ethics code or ACA ethics code and you should be able to pull it up as well. So go ahead and kind of chat with your neighbors and we will kind of walk through all the violations after that. Folks are starting to get quiet, so how about I give you like another minute to wrap it up? It's okay if you don't find three, probably amongst the class will find at least three, so. Okie dokie, well, let's get started. What group wants to volunteer a violation first? Okay, awesome, thanks. You can start with one, then we'll rotate around, and then if you have more, we'll come back. Yes, yeah, that's a really good point. So they can actually get copies of the report, and in fact, they should get copies of the report. They can't get copies of the raw test score. So that he was right about, yes, the raw test scores, you do have to it's like your legal and ethical obligation to protect those tests. But yeah, you should give them a copy of the report. And when did the school or whoever else they give permission to release it to? Exactly. Yeah, that's good.
Department one is asking what was the test for, the test is for.
Yeah, you want to have what's called informed consent, and even for kiddos, you want to have assent, where they verbally tell you they understand what they're going to be doing and agree to do it. And clearly, he never explained to this kiddo why he was going through these tests, right? That's a huge ethical violation. Might even be a legal violation, honestly.
It's 9 years old and they use like their adult intelligence. There's no wonder he didn't do well.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's something that's harder to catch. So good Googling, Debbie, or just remembering from other classes. But yeah, so he gave this, Dr. Colby gave Martin the adult version of the test, and he should have given him the WISC, the WISC, which is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children. So yeah, that's a huge violation. That's something, and if this was today, we're also on the WASE 4. I think when this was written, it was still the 3, so that would have been fine. So then he's using not only the wrong test, but an outdated test. Yeah.
So, let's say A, that's the malpractice,
Mm-hmm.
which it states up there that
Yeah, and like, what is he drawing this based off, right? Like, if he only gave him the waist, that's not gonna tell you that, right? Yeah, I don't know if anyone had anything to say about sort of the Freudian stuff in here about the phallic stage. Did anybody talk about that? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but I'd like you to. But yeah, that you should veracity or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are still people who buy into Freud's theory, so it's entirely possible you could have something like this in a report. But if they're using current psychological science, right, they wouldn't say this. So certainly this wouldn't hold up in court, for example.
I have a question. So when like you said the test was out of date.
Mhm.
So when a new test comes out, like once you already have the old test,
Mhm.
is there anything like a sale or something like that? Like, for that, or like maybe if you're a member, you get like a discount.
That's a good question. I think when they first come out, they are discounted. Because I remember when the Waste 4 came out, I was assistant director of our clinic, so I was in charge of like ordering materials. So I got to order, I think, like 7 wases or something. It was a lot of money. But I think there was some sort of discount. And you also, there are like ways to get it cheaper. So like the one I have that I'll show you when we talk about intelligence test came in just like a cardboard box. But if you want to upgrade, you can get it in like a fancy bag. That costs more money because you're paying for the fancy bag. But yeah, so it is pricey. You do have, I believe, a year to change over. But yeah, if you don't know what's coming and you have a small, like we had money because we were at a major university in a well-funded department, right? So it was kind of no big deal for us to be like, yeah, we need this. Other people don't have that. So if let's say you're a small private practice person, right? Now you've got to figure out how to scrape together. I'm going to look it up because I don't remember, but how much the waste is. I think it's like $1,200. I could be overestimating. All right, this is Pearson. This is the people who sell it, so it should stay on here. There we go, like 1,400. I mean, the idea is that you would use it on lots of different people, right? So, yeah, it is an investment. Yes, so the kit comes with, that's what I was trying to click on it. Here we go. So you get all the materials in the test. You get a certain number of record forms, response booklets, and scoring keys, all those types of things. So I guess it's not that much more. It's less than $100 more if you want to get the case. But just didn't, I was like, if I really want, I can like buy a case off Amazon for like $20, I'm sure. But I just still have it in a box. You can get the fancy briefcase, that's almost $100 more. But yeah, so it does give you these, but that's only 25 people. If you're not doing that many of these, that's probably okay. But if this is your practice and you're doing, I don't know, 5 of these a week, right? You're gonna go through that pretty quickly. And then to get more test forms costs additional money as well. They now have like, you can do it digitally, and that's what these are. These are more expensive. That's like the software. So no, you have to buy that. Here we go. If you need it, another 25 record forms, it's $150. So part of this you would offset by what you charge the clients, right? But in some, yeah, but if you're taking insurance, like they're gonna pay you maybe 1/10 of what you charge. I mean, it's not that bad for mental health most of the time. But for example, I don't know if anyone's ever looked at like if you get blood work done. Like one time I got just like the blood work for my physical done, and I think it was like hundreds of dollars, and they got paid like $10. And I was like, how is that like ethical or illegal? I think for mental health care, it tends to be a decent percentage, right? But it's only going to account usually for face-to-face time you're assessing that person. So if you don't sprinkle the software, it can actually take you a while to score up everything for the waste, and then you've got to write up your report, and none of that is reimbursed. None of that, it's only face-to-face time in most cases for insurance. So this is why assessments might be billed at a pretty high rate, because you're trying to sort of offset the fact that you might spend another 6 to 8 hours after you're not face-to-face with the person getting everything together. Yeah. It's not cheap. And again, if you are in a university clinic where they have funds set aside for this, no big deal, right? But again, if you're in private practice, this can add up pretty quickly. Is he still alive? I don't actually know. I think he's dead. Nope, 1981. But probably his estate does, I would imagine. But it depends. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. We'll get to this when we talk about intelligence tests, but intelligence tests, you actually can't re-give that often just because the items are set. So the person's going to do better the second time just because they'll remember stuff. This is why if someone's around 16, it's actually kind of nice because you can give them the whisk and then also give them the waste later, which are different enough that you can kind of get it. But yeah, for our kiddo in this scenario, it should be the whisk. Let's take a look. It's probably about the same price. The whisk is always ahead of the waste. So there are the 5th edition for that. So yeah, about the same price for the whisk. So let's say you are in a practice where you are seeing kids, but also late adolescents. You might need to own both these kits. And then let's say you also are doing preschoolers. Then you're going to need the Wixie. And the Wixie is about the same price. So, I mean, again, this could all add up. Yeah. That's a good question. So I think different municipalities or different school districts and stuff do it in different ways. So some just give a standardized test type thing. But I know my friends who were child psychology people. So my PhD program, you went for clinical psychology, but then you had a specialty within it. So my specialty was adult psychopathology. There were people who just specialized in assessment. And then you could just specialize in child psychopathology or child clinical. And they had to do a lot more training than we did, but they would do assessments on the kids and they would do full risks, for example, as some districts required that for get testing. But yeah, some just give and I'm sure there's research behind it, hopefully, especially with the standardized test, there typically is, because a lot of money goes into constructing those, right? Yeah.
I actually remember taking.
Do you?
In elementary school.
Oh, wow.
And the interesting thing was, at the end of it, the teachers got the scores. We didn't get the scores. We didn't know what we got. So it was just wild because I guess they were trying to figure out exactly how to administer tests to us and try to figure out exactly how we score and all those things. My parents were there too. My parents actually joined in. All our parents.
Oh, wow.
So it was wild. One of the tests, I forget which one it was, particularly what's called, but they had us, they gave us a blank piece of paper, and they had us draw whatever image we wanted, and based on how big the image was and where it fell on the paper would determine some sort of psychological result.
You can't see behind the mask, but I'm laughing. Yeah, so those are called draw a person tests or draw something tests. There are a whole bunch of different ones. There's a house one, a tree one. They're a form of projective, so they're kind of like the Rorschach. That you can score them in a way that is based on science. I'm not saying that always happens. Let's put it that way. And I certainly don't want to discredit any type of drawing test, because, for example, our neighbors across town, EVMS, they have an art therapy program. And actually at EVMS, they have made an empirically supported art assessment that they give to every client. So it can be done. I'm just, yeah, some of it like that is, did anyone see the movie Parasite?
Yeah.
How they feel like, well, because he did this in this quarter, he's schizophrenic, right? And that's BS, right? And but there are people who will do that. So yeah, that's a really good question. Hopefully they were using a scientific method, but maybe not. Yeah, so you don't know. That's really interesting. All right, any other things that stood out for y'all in terms of violations? I think you hit on all the major ones I was thinking of.
I mean, like you were saying, like
Mm,
that would break that prohibition issue.
right, right. There's stuff in there that like a kid just wouldn't be expected to know yet, right? And that's okay. Should Dr. Colby keep doing psychological assessments? Yeah, no, right? This person should be probably called up for ethics violation with the APA, maybe reported to his state board in terms of ethical violations as well. Your license can kind of like get a strike on it, or if you have multiple strikes, you can lose your license, which then technically means you can't practice. And it's just like doctors, essentially, right? So if doctors get a certain amount of malpractice, that's supposed to happen to them too. So, yeah, good job. This is the type of, unfortunately, this is the type of stuff that does happen. Maybe not to this extreme, but even with therapy. So for give you an example, there was a clinic across town from where my training clinic was, and many clients would have seen them just because they were like, you know, one of the ones with the big ads, so people went to them. And multiple of my clients I saw were like, yeah, my therapist just used to like fall asleep, or my therapist used to like tell me their problems during my session. And so like there are these horror stories out there. Does that mean everyone in our field is like that? No. But it does mean that there are people out there who probably need some more training or just shouldn't be doing any of the shiz, right? And that's important. Great job on that. And I will give you credit for the assignment. You don't need to turn anything in. So let me go ahead and get our captions going for this. All right. So we're going to start talking about reliability and validity. This is going to take us like 4 classes because there's a lot in this. And I think I told you all before that when I was in grad school, my whole first semester assessment course was about this, basically. And then our second semester assessment course started to go more into the tests and how to give them. And we actually had a third course at the same time as our second semester one, where we actually practiced giving them. So we did intake interviews on each other. I gave my husband an intelligence test, all that fun stuff. So we're going to start by talking about reliability. And then we will continue into validity. These things really are interrelated, not only conceptually, but statistically. Like if you don't have good reliability, it can be really hard to have good validity. So that's why we look at these together. All right. So in our like day-to-day life, if we say something or someone is reliable, what do we mean? You can count on them.
Steady.
Yeah, steady person, steady char, maybe. Yeah, they're stable, they're trustworthy, they're consistent, right? How about in our everyday life, what do we mean when we say something's valid?
It means if you were to expect it, it would check out.
Yeah, exactly. Really good. Yeah, so like truthful, legitimate, sometimes even means like convincing. And these ideas are related to the psychological constructs, and you'll kind of see as we go through this. So I really like this analogy for reliability and validity. I think this is like the clearest explanation of it. So reliability is consistency. And hang on just a sec. I think I had one more, and it's fine. I'll just stick with the slide. So reliability is essentially, are you getting consistent scores either every time you give this, or across a person, that type of thing. So essentially, it's the extent to which your scoring, your measurement is free from error. So theoretically, and you don't have to write down this next part, but theoretically, reliability is the ratio of true score variance to observed score variance. Basically, what that means, taking a step back, I literally took a step back, that's funny, is that we can only ever get observed scores when we test people, right? It's just like what we observe in the moment. We'll never actually get at the true score, probably, because sometimes the person can't access all the information they want to get to us. You know, like if we ask someone, like, when did you start feeling sad? Like, no one's going to remember the exact moment they started feeling sad, right? And sometimes it's such a gradual thing we can't tell. Also, you know, just things like who the examiner is, what the environment you're taking the assessment in is, you know, like what happened to you earlier that day, right? Like if you're in a car accident, you might be sort of distracted and giving different answers. All those can affect the fact that like we can't quite get at the true score. But if we could, like, again, just like take a UPC thing, scan the back of someone's head, it would tell us like, here is their sadness level, here is their intelligence level, right? We don't have that. I don't know if we want to ever have that, right? Like there's a little Minority Report creepy, yeah. But the best we can do are the observed scores, like what we actually observe as we're assessing someone, either if their scores as they fill out a questionnaire or if they interact with us and answer our questions. So basically, reliability is the difference between the true score and the observed score. And so the reliability of a measure is the consistency of that measure. So regardless of what's going on that affects that true score, are we going to get about the same observed score every time? Validity is the extent to which something measures what it's supposed to measure, what it says it measures. So it's the extent to which it measures what it says it does. So let's say I have what I think is a measure of hostility. And as I do research on this, I actually find it correlating more with scores of depression, not really related to hostility at all. Well, that's not a valid measure of hostility then, right? So that's essentially what validity gets at, is does this actually measure what it says it's measuring? It can be seen as like the truth or the accuracy of the measure. And that's why this analogy kind of works really well. So reliability in this analogy is consistent shooting. So kind of shooting in the same side. We could think of this as target shooting with a gun. We could think of this as shooting a bow and arrow, right? Either one would work. And then validity is hitting the bullseye, because that's what we intend to do. We intend to hit the bullseye. We are measuring the bullseye with our arrow, right? And so that's what we are shooting for, literally. So what we want is target A. We want it to be both reliable, consistent, so it's really clustering around the bullseye, but also valid. We're hitting the true, as close as we can to that true score, right? And we're hitting it right there on the bullseye. So this is both reliable and valid. The person's consistent in terms of where they shoot, and the pattern of shots is all within a small area. And then they're hitting the intended target. So again, intended target we could think of as what we want to measure, right? That also means it's valid because it's assessing what it wanted to assess. They're doing what they wanted to do. Now we could have one that's reliable but not valid, like that measure of hostility. Maybe all the items that really seem to be measuring the same thing, but it's not actually hitting that target of hostility, right? It's kind of measuring something else. So then again, we have almost the same type of cluster here, right? So they are reliable, they are consistent, but they are not hitting that bullseye. They're not hitting at what they are supposed to hit, what they're supposed to do. So it's not valid. You could also have a case where the measure is just not very good at all, right? And so it's neither reliable nor valid. So in this case, you know, the green circles are all over the place. So you could have a measure where you think you're measuring one thing, but in fact, like each item is measuring kind of something a little different. So you've got inconsistency or unreliability. And here we have the green circles also not only even hitting the target, much less the bullseye, right? So in addition to not measuring the same thing, we're not measuring what we want to be measuring. And you might get like some items that are closer than others, right? But it's still not reliable or valid. This is the opposite of what we want. We want A, we do not want C. Sometimes B can be more dangerous, right? Because we might look at the reliability values and there are statistics that can tell us how reliable something is. That is god awful sound. Wow, I don't know what that is. But unless we look at the validity, we can kind of trick ourselves into thinking like, oh yeah, this is reliable. So what a great measure, right? So we want to always make sure we're checking both. And there are statistics that let us see how reliable it is, essentially how related to each other all the items are. And there are other statistics we can do that show us how valid it is by comparing it to other existing measures that kind of get at the same thing. And so as you hear this, if you're kind of thinking about your group project, this is a lot of what your group project will be doing. All right, part of what goes into this is using the correlation coefficient. So the correlation coefficient, as we talked about when we talked about the quiz results, is an indicator of the strength of the relationship between two variables. So both what we use for reliability, but particularly what we use for validity, is the correlation coefficient. Reliability is kind of like based on the correlation coefficient. You're like correlating all the items with each other. But for validity, you literally just use a correlation coefficient to see how it relates to other ones. So again, it goes between 0 being the weakest correlation, and then it goes out to 1, and it goes out to -1, those being equally strong. So for a positive correlation, it means that if one variable goes up, the other one also goes up. So, you know, as amount of distraction goes up, attention, well, that would be attention goes down, right? Distractibility goes up. There we go. So that's called a direct relationship. They both go up. In my 202 class, we talked about how sometimes these correlations aren't that helpful. So like there is a correlation if you look at ice cream sales and homicides. They both go up at the same time. And it's just because they both happen more when the weather's warm. So, you know, correlations do not explain everything. That's a really important thing to note. You've probably heard the phrase correlation does not equal causation, right? But it does tell us information of like, are they related in the way we expect them to be related? Negative correlation would be this side of the number line, and it's as one variable goes up, the other one goes down. So the example I often give in abnormal is as depression goes up, activity level goes down. And again, just an example of how that's not necessarily causal. So it could be as you're depressed, you want to do stuff less, right? But it could also be as you engage in less of your activities you usually like, you have less to be happy about. And also, that's a symptom of depression, so there could be something else causing it, right? So maybe you have broken your leg, right? So you can't do the activities you usually like, and that's also making you depressed. So again, being aware of that, but an inverse relationship. One thing goes up, the other goes down, and sometimes we want to see that. So for example, if we're studying something like, you know, amount of helpful messages you read about something, right? Let's use my example. So like amount of like positive messages you read about your body, right? You hope as that goes up, body dissatisfaction goes down, right? If it doesn't, then maybe those positive messages aren't actually positive enough, or not helpful or relevant to that person, right? So this is the metric by which we measure validity, and then in terms of reliability, this sort of looks at, again, how well the items correlate. And for reliability, we look at this side of the number line, but we use the same metric. So the closer a reliability is to 1, the stronger it is, the better it is. Typically, for tests we use in a clinical setting, or we're going to be diagnosing someone with something, or might determine if they get like an IEP or something like that, we want to have reliabilities at the 0.9 level or above. So really, really strong. For research, though, it's generally considered acceptable to have a reliability at the 0.7 level. So there is a range of what you can look at for reliability. Oh, I had slides for this. Look at me go, being prepared on here. So again, as our approaches, 1 over here, the strength increases in a direct and positive way. As it approaches -1, it increases in an inverse and negative way. So again, strong relationship between something going up and something going down. But the closer it is to 0, the weaker the relationship is. I mean, if you're at 0, like 0.0 something for correlation, there's basically no relationship at all between those variables. And sometimes we want that, right? Sometimes that's okay. So for example, something like depression or anxiety and intelligence. Like, we don't want those to be correlated, because depression and anxiety are things that fluctuate throughout our lives, whereas our intelligence is supposed to be pretty stable. These are some of the sort of benchmarks that are often used to say how strong a correlation is. And again, you might see different people interpret these in different ways, but this is kind of a good idea. I would say in psychological research, oftentimes a medium correlation is like where we want to land. Like if you have something in the 0.4 to 0.6 range, when you're looking at validity, that's pretty good. Once you get to the 0.7 range, we start worrying about something that we call multi-coloniality. Fun term. Where we essentially say these measures are so similar that there's no distinction between them. We could just like combine the items from these 2 measures and they would be fine, essentially. So we don't want that, because if we have multicollinearity, if we're measuring so closely, right, that they're almost the same thing, we're not adding anything to the science by creating a new assessment. We want something that's like going to give us additional information, essentially. Also, if we're doing any kind of like modeling statistically, and you put in variables that are so highly correlated, they're at risk of multicollinearity, it's actually going to mess with your model. All right, here's some other correlation examples. Maybe looking at something like your SAT score and your college GPA. And maybe you look at something like the number of missed classes and your college GPA. So here, the correlation is only about 0.35. Okay, so like that medium range, right? And here we have a stronger inverse relationship, that if you miss a lot of classes, your GPA is not as great. Interesting thing about the SAT college GPA one is we have what is called a restrictive range for that. So let me skip ahead here real quick. Yeah, and I'll get back to the previous slide. So because we only accept people with SAT scores above a certain level, we don't have the full range of people who have every SAT score imaginable, right? So because of that, we run into what's called a ceiling effect, where like yeah, there might be a relationship between SAT score and college GPA, but like the range of which we can look at it is so limited, right? That we don't really get the full picture. Just make sure I'm not running you all over. And we got a couple minutes. Cool. So what we do for correlations, as you can see from the graph I just showed you, was when we basically put their SAT score on one axis and their GPA on the other axis, and those dots make up a scatter plot of our data set of everyone's score here. And obviously, when we look at this, even within one university or nationally, we would have much more than, whatever this is, 10 data points, the scatter plot. But this is for simplicity's sake. So the scatter plot is this diagram where you have dots that represent one person. So, like this person's SAT score was somewhere in the 900 range. Their GPA is just above 2.5. And then you can start to see patterns. And there are ways that we can statistically essentially determine the slope of that line. And that essentially tells us the correlation, how related they are. Here you can see when missed classes and GPA, we have more of a range, right? Because some people are never going to miss a class. That's great, but also potentially ableist, right? Whereas other people might have stuff going on in their lives where they have to miss a lot, right? And again, this is why correlation is not causation. Because it could be, well, they never learned the material because they didn't go to class, sure, but again, what if they're hospitalized for COVID-induced pneumonia, right? And that's why they missed so many classes. Then their poor GPA really has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with their coping with a potentially lethal disease, right? All right, we will stop there and I will go over the coefficient of determination on Monday. Yeah, I had to think about what day it was. And then we'll dive back into more about reliability. So thanks for trying my new setting for my new version of this. Did that work okay, or would you rather have pieces of paper? So fine? Okay, cool. We'll do that from now on then.